The Void, Series 1, Episode 3. Trust in the Enemy, by Richard Marcus Powell. Chapter 1. Namor Skenn woke with a start. There was a colossal pain inside his skull and blood seeping from his nose. He was definitely woozy as well, a side effect of the drugs. "Is it out?" Skenn slurred. "It is," the surgeon responded. "This has been a significant procedure, and I would recommend you spend at least 3 weeks resting." "That is not going to happen." "I figured that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have come to see me," the surgeon answered. "Still, I have to try. At least try to keep it clean and don't interfere with it." Skenn touched his head, trying to locate the access point of the surgery. He could feel the seal at the back of his head, plugging the hole that now existed there. "Don't touch it, you idiot," the surgeon complained. "What did I just say?" "I'm not paying you for advice." "More's the pity. You might live longer." The surgeon handed Skenn a media pad, prompting for a transaction authorization. Skenn complied willingly. He swung his legs over the side of the cot and put them on the ground. He tried to stand, only to collapse backwards and grab hold of the gurney. "It'll take a while for the anesthetic to wear off." Skenn went hunting for his clothes and his weapons. Finding them, he started re-equipping them. The pseudo-hospital he found himself in was well-equipped and clean, but deeply illegal. But medical care on Muself was sparse, to say the least. Illegal operations were tolerated purely for the fact that those who lived here were welcome for any kind of medical care. Skenn knew the surgeon and trusted him, at least as far as he trusted anyone. He knew he was a good professional who had fallen afoul of the wrong people, hence his current situation. He knew he could be abrasive, but that didn't bother Skenn like it did some people. "If anyone comes after me, just tell them everything you know. Don't piss them off in any way," Skenn advised. "Oh, I plan to," the surgeon responded. "I'm in the business of saving lives, and that includes my own." With no further word, Skenn dressed and left the clinic, still wobbling on his feet. Outside of the clinic, it was busy, with many sapients going about their business, which, being on Muself, was trade. Muself was a planet that bordered Teel and Jujunkai territory and was preliminary trade hub. The Teel Corporation didn't maintain much of a presence here because it was such a small population and, beyond the proximity of any strategic locations, largely worthless. The trade that was conducted here wasn't the sort of any high-priority trade that would have its own established colony, but rather the fringe and specialist products, and the black market. Despite the dubious legality of the trade occurring on planet, it was largely tolerated, mostly because these types of hubs were inevitable, and closing it down would only move the market elsewhere. There were less than 1 million humans on the planet, and they were all concentrated in this one township, an environment sealed from the unbreathable atmosphere outside. There were probably a few 100,000 Xenos as well, all here for the trade. It was a good place to rest and hide, but only for a short time. For now, he would settle for making it back to his ship. Once he was in space and traveling again, he could place the ship on autopilot and sleep. He couldn't stay and rest. There were people tracking him, and it would only take time for them to find him. There was a tracer upon his person, one that he simply couldn't remove. The Teel Corporation had implanted it for this very contingency and would be using it to locate him. It linked automatically to local network servers, with no way to suppress it. It was constantly updating the Teel Corporation to his presence. This was why it stuck to planets like Muself. With little to no corporate militia presence, it took them time to respond to the update. Even if they did, they'd usually be the dregs of the militia, and poorly equipped. Then there were the sapient acquisition specialists, or SAPACs, to worry about. Those who hunted down targeted individuals for the state. They were harder to elude than the militia, as they were more familiar with the tradecraft that he was an expert in. They frequented the same places and traded with the same people. Better to keep moving and try to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. He'd known this was going to happen from the start. The second he started tampering with his implants, he knew they would come for him. He was of high value, but he was also of high risk. Skenn was on edge, paranoid and suspicious of everyone around him. Someone walked by too closely and he drew his hand closer to his blade, ready to unsheath it if he needed to. only to let his hand drop again as they passed by. Uniforms stood out. He could spot those quickly. What he was more wary of were the Sapaks. They took great effort to look unassuming and hide amongst a crowd. Hell, he had done the same himself, and this was what drove his paranoia. He knew how easy it was to blend in. If you had a scar, tattoo, or other identifying mark, you covered it up as best you could. You didn't dress like a badass or drive or pilot anything that stood out. You had to look as bland and ordinary as possible. So, he made his way back to the landing pad, constantly monitoring everybody around him, his mistrust not letting him feel safe until he was within the confines of his ship. The landing pad itself was located at the edge of the enclosed city. All the landing pads spread radially around the edge. He could see his ship through a transparent panel and felt a little more relaxed. The subspace Phoenix, as he had taken to calling it, was his safe space. Staggering down the embarkment arm, he reached the hatch to his ship and opened it with his combination, briefly wondering if he had forgotten it since the surgery. He climbed in and made his way to the cockpit. The subspace Phoenix from the outside looked unremarkable. There was a charm to it, but it didn't stand out. Inside, its purpose was far more apparent. It was slick, functional, and obviously military-grade. Skenn slumped into the pilot's seat and activated the Quancom, notifying the Central Flight Control of his intention to leave and requesting clearance. When it was granted, he activated the engines and launched into the poisonous atmosphere outside. He started to program his autopilot, setting the destination to the planet Targan. Once clear of the atmosphere, he started it up and clambered out of his seat and into the living quarters. He grabbed some painkillers from the medical bay and downed them with a bottle of water. He collapsed into bed and closed his eyes, waiting for the headache to pass.